Again, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to join us live for today's webinar. My name is Mathilde, and I'm in charge of marketing here at Amity, where we provide customer success managers for customers at scale. We are thrilled and our last webinar of the season. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Small technical difficulty. So we're thrilled to be joined for today's webinar and our last webinar of the season by the awesome Linda Schwaber-Cohen, who is the head of training at Skilljar, and Sarah Roba, who is the manager of customer success at Skilljar. For those of you who don't use Skilljar yet, it's a cloud-based learning management system for companies to educate and train their customers and partners online. Naturally, Sarah an incredible wealth of knowledge around customer onboarding and training for today's webinar, which is why I am so excited to have them for today's webinar as they are presenting on the topic, the art and science of customer onboarding. So I've already taken a peek at Sarah and Linda's presentation. It's looking amazing. They'll be sharing a whole lot of knowledge, tips, advice, and strategies that they actually use with their own customers as well. So I hope everyone's excited. Before we do get started, I have a few housekeeping notes that I want to share with everyone. So as usual, we will be on Twitter. Use the hashtag CSWebinar and don't hesitate to tag us at GetAmity and at Skilljar. We would love to retweet you and share your screenshots and your insights as well. We are doing a Q&A at the end of the webinar today. We've saved some time to answer questions at the end. So in your Zoom webinar panel, you actually have a dedicated Q&A button, which you can click and send us questions whenever they arise during the webinar. So don't wait until the end. We will answer them at the end, but don't be shy and just send them our way whenever they pop into your head. And as usual, we will be recording this webinar and we will be sending the slides and the recording to everyone soon, tomorrow before the weekend. So check your inbox and you'll get an email from me, which has the recording. And for anyone joining us for the very first time this week, Amity provides customer success management software that does a variety of things, including health scoring, tracking engagements, automating emails, and much more. And you'll actually be able to request a demo right after the webinar if you're interested in learning more about it. But well, I hope this gives you some context around why Amity organizes these webinars about customer success topics every 2 weeks. So this is the last one of the season. We're taking a little bit of a break, but usually it's every 2 weeks. That's all that you're going to hear about Amity today because I'm super excited to be introducing our awesome presenters. So Linda and Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to hand things over to you now.
Thanks so much for having us. We're really excited to be here. And just to get started, I wanted to tell everybody a little bit about Skilljar. We're a modern cloud-based learning management system, and we really work with customer and partner training, and we help our customers accelerate product onboarding and adoption and drive customer engagement. And we do that through modern training experiences backed by data. And without further ado, we'll just get right into the meat and potatoes of today's presentation, starting with our agenda. So today we're really going to be talking about building an onboarding program. And within that, we'll be discussing creating and revising content for your training, engaging your audience, and driving onboarding success. And as I mentioned, or as Mathilde mentioned, please do ask questions at any time. We'll be fielding those as many as we can at the end of the webinar. And I'm really excited to have Sarah with me here as well. So it's always important to kind of align on why customer onboarding is important. I know it's often an afterthought, but poor onboarding is actually the leading cause of churn, according to a survey done a few years back by Preact. So survey respondents said that 23% poor onboarding leads to 23% of churn, or was considered a leading cause. It's just important to think about and kind of align on that as we get started. And one way that people are conquering onboarding is really by utilizing on-demand solutions. And I just wanted to know, and Mathilde, maybe you could launch this poll for us.
Yeah, for sure.
Are the folks on the line, are you utilizing on-demand customer onboarding? So that would be like a learning management system, for example, or even videos or something in your help center that helps with onboarding. Mm-hmm. So the answers are yes, no, or maybe you don't even onboard customers at this point.
Awesome. A lot of answers are coming through.
Awesome.
Cool. We're just going to give everyone a few seconds to get a chance to share.
Fantastic. Yeah, let us know what you think. Let us know what you're doing right now. What are our results here?
Okay, so let me end the poll. Everyone's had a chance to answer. Closing the poll now and sharing the results. So we've got 57% saying yes, 38% saying no, and 5% saying we don't currently onboard customers.
Okay, cool.
Interesting.
Good to know. So it sounds like a lot of you do have an on-demand program, which is great because a lot of what we're going to talk about will pertain to that as well. And for those of you who don't, this is good food for thought so that you can consider if that would be something that would be helpful for your customers. Just a little more context here. TSIA recently did a survey for their summit participants for the educational services track of TSIA. And they actually confirmed that every single one of their participants said that their customers are asking for more digital learning content. And this really kind of pertains to making sure you have exactly what your customers need when you need it. So it's just something to think about how you're building out that digital learning content for your customers. And that leads us to our first topic.
Awesome. So Linda, a question for you. So customers regularly ask about content creation. What advice do you have for someone who's just getting started and planning their content?
Yeah, I hear this all the time, especially if you're a small team. Maybe you only have customer success managers right now and nobody dedicated to onboarding.
Exactly.
So the first advice is really to start with the low-hanging fruit. And when we say low-hanging fruit, it's looking at the data that you already have. So everybody has some support tickets. Everybody has some sort of knowledge base or help articles for the most part. And I would collaborate with your customer support team if you have one, and really just dig into these and say, what are my most popular help articles, or what are my most popular support ticket topics? And those would be the pieces that I would start with. That's what your customers are asking for first, most likely.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Additionally, we always talk about thinking about the goal when you're thinking about training. So if you're getting started with content, I like to avoid feature by feature content that doesn't help a customer understand why they're going through the motions. It's important to kind of start at what is the major thing that customers need to be able to accomplish. And we have a content planning map. This is actually available in the resources section at skilljar.com if you want to take a look. But it's a simple spreadsheet, and it's basically taking you through the different steps of creating content. And the first step when you're planning this is understanding what students need to be able to do or to accomplish. Not just a feature, but really why are they using that feature? Because oftentimes a goal will actually have many different features underneath it. So that takes us to the second piece. What is the prerequisite knowledge that's needed? What information do they need in order to accomplish that goal? And maybe that's where you have several features. So in the example that I have on this slide, in Skilljar, our customers need to be able to build a course to be successful. And in order to build a course, they need to leverage tons of different features, or they can choose to leverage tons of different features, like creating sections or lessons. They need to understand what kinds of lesson types are available to them. So there's lots of prerequisite knowledge there. And the next step is existing content. So you probably have made a few ad hoc resources, or maybe they live in different places on Google Drive or in Box or Dropbox. And this is an opportunity to dig through all of that and determine what content you already have at your disposal. Learning content doesn't have to be perfect. And if you have some things that can get people up and running quickly, it's often a real blessing to start with that. And then the next step here is what new content will you have to make? So this is the next step in the planning process that I usually go through when I'm planning an onboarding. What don't you have that now needs to be made? And then who's the subject matter expert? So if there's information that you don't have, who can you ask to help you make this content? Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. I've definitely seen huge success with our customers who've started onboarding with a prepared content planning map similar to this. Establishing a clear plan that addresses each of the questions you mentioned is really a great way just to set yourself up for success. And that's exactly what we've seen with some of our most successful customers.
Yeah, and generally speaking, whenever you're thinking about onboarding or training, organization and planning will really help you a lot throughout the process. You think that it takes time. It seems like a kind of a bump in the road. You have to stop and plan, but it really makes things go faster later. So it's something I highly recommend.
Totally.
And the next step here is using the right tools and technologies. So in addition to content, you need to take a look at the technology you're using to distribute and present content to customers. And it should be on brand. It should be available for customers when they need it. And it should just work. They shouldn't have difficulty getting to it, because if they do, it's going to kind of derail their onboarding process and they likely won't come back. So you really want to make sure that whatever you have available to them is accessible. So one way you could do that is with an LMS like Skilljar, learning management system, and that way you can track what's happening and you can see exactly where in the onboarding process any one of your customers might be. But you also might choose to just use a webinar platform. So let's say you're a leaner team at this point and you don't really have the resources to stand up a system. Maybe you want to just have a webinar platform like Zoom, like we're using today, or GoToWebinar, and that can really just help for virtual instructor-led training if you're just getting started. Or if you're one step behind there and you just need video hosting software, I personally love Wistia. I also like Vimeo and YouTube also work. But these are kind of the three major areas that I would say help customers access your training when you need it. And sometimes these initiatives can take some resources, but they can also make a substantial impact. So I would say crowdsource knowledge when you're getting started and make sure you have all the right people in the room as you're getting started, just so that you have maximum buy-in in whatever you're about to do. And that way you also have more buy-in if you do want to make a technology purchase later to really enhance the onboarding process for your customers. So that brings us to our next section, and I'm gonna turn it over to Sarah in just a moment. Before I do, I want to talk about building an onboarding program and the 3 flavors of customer onboarding. So we like to think of this metaphor like getting dinner when we think of onboarding, and for us, there's 3 ways that you can get dinner. The first way is really similar to a self-service product. So maybe your product, for example, is something that is very simple. Maybe it has a high volume of users. Maybe it's freemium, or there's just a low contract value associated with each individual customer. And this is really common for B2C tools or dev tools where you have a super high-tech user. And when we like to think of this like going to the grocery store and making your own dinner, right? So onboarding for these folks, it's going to be pretty self-service. They're going to go to the supermarket, they're going to buy all their ingredients, they're going to look up the recipe, they're then going to put everything together, they're going to set the table, they're doing everything themselves. So once again, if you have really high-tech users and a very simple product, you might consider just designing a self-service onboarding flow. The next one is low touch. It's like a taco truck. I actually love taco trucks. It makes it simple. You have your chicken, your beef, maybe your vegetarian option. It's pretty simple. You're not getting everything served to you. You're just getting kind of your paper napkin, your plastic fork, and you're sitting on the curb and eating your taco. This is really good for kind of mild complexity products. So this kind of onboarding would be you're serving your customers some degree of help and guidance, but really there's probably not that much needed. And this is usually very typical if there's only mild friction in adoption, but there is some. So you do need to kind of nudge your customers in the right direction. It's often really good when your customers are SMB, small businesses and medium-sized businesses, and you only really have to get a small team of users adopting the product. So you might consider providing something, but you probably don't need to go all out and do everything for them. Mm-hmm. And then the last flavor of customer onboarding is really the high touch. This is a fancy restaurant. You have valet parking. You have a really nice menu. You have really great service. Maybe you even have to wear a suit and tie to go in. But this is really high touch. And this is when you're really, maybe it's a new product with new behaviors that people aren't familiar with. You really have to change their workflows in a very significant way. And with that, you have an extensive implementation process sometimes too. So before a customer can even start seeing value, maybe there's a whole lot of work that they need to do on their end, and you need to guide them through that. Oftentimes there's many stakeholders involved in this kind of onboarding process as well. So it's not just one department, maybe it's actually organization wide. And this often pertains to enterprise users, where you really have to penetrate a company and make sure that lots of people are adopting that. And with that, we wanted to share a little bit about Skilljar's onboarding, and I'm going to let Sarah take it away because she is the expert in all things Skilljar onboarding. And she's going to give you a few tips on how we designed our onboarding program and what we think is really helpful as you design yours.
Great, thanks so much, Linda. Okay, so first, identifying milestones for your customers is key. So you can see here we have 4 phases of onboarding that we've identified: handoff, kickoff, soft launch, and launch. So for Skilljar, these are really specific milestones or phases of onboarding that ensure our customers are on their way to getting value. Again, these are our milestones, but it's important to take a look at your onboarding process to really determine the milestones that best fit your product. Okay, so let's dive into handoff. So during the handoff phase, the whole purpose of handoff is really to get customer success and sales aligned. So sales, they're experts on the customer. They know exactly what they want. They know all of their requirements, all of their business goals. And during the handoff phase, this is when all of that information is being passed off to the customer success manager, which is super critical, especially as you move along in the onboarding process. So ensuring that customer success and sales are completely aligned. And this one huge help in this area is really providing clear documentation and next steps. So that could be using a sales handoff form that has all of the information that was collected around business drivers and timelines and initiatives associated with large milestones, but just ensuring that all of that information is stored in one place, whether that's Salesforce or Amity or any other place that's accessible to both CS and sales. Another thing that we do here at Skilljar that we found has been super helpful is we have a meeting with the account executive and the customer success manager. And this really helps to fill in any gaps that perhaps might be missing in the documentation to make sure that the customer success manager is completely set up to support the customer once that introduction is made.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because we consider this part of onboarding, but the customer isn't really even involved. It just improves their experience so much.
Yep, exactly. And so at the end of the handoff phase, which moves us into the kickoff phase, is usually this is where we send a welcome email where we introduce the customer success manager to the customer. So that's when we kind of create those introductions and then move into kickoff. So within the kickoff phase, this is where we really start to establish that new relationship with the customer. So customer success is becoming familiar with the customer and vice versa. So we usually start this phase with scheduling an introduction call. So where we're kicking off the project and really becoming aligned on the customer's specific goals and initiatives, what their minimum viable product is, reviewing timelines, and ensuring that we really have a good understanding of what those goals are, and we're really aligned between ourselves and the customer, because sometimes things can change between those conversations that happen during the sales process and the actual kickoff, and sometimes the key players change as well. So using kickoff to really get aligned with the customer and understand what their needs are and how they're going to get there is super critical. So that's what we cover in the kickoff phase.
Yeah, and this is a really good opportunity to get buy-in. And I think that this document that you guys use with customers is really helpful for getting buy-in. There were lots of questions about how do you get buy-in from your customers.
Yes. So one key part of that kickoff phase is once you've established all of your goals, initiatives, MVP timeline, we use this project plan template as a way to track all of that information. So within the full project plan template, we identify owners, timelines, status, and this is a great way just to make sure that you're staying aligned with the customers, ensuring that everyone knows what you need from them, what they need from you, and just really staying aligned on the process to ensure that you're moving forward, everyone's comfortable with what's happening, and you're also aligned on any changes that are being made, because timelines can shift, priorities can shift a little bit, but this is a great way to make sure that everyone is staying aligned through that entire process.
Yeah, and while this document is really specific to learning management system implementation, it could be good inspiration to you as you design your onboarding program. So if you want to download it, it's also available in our resources section on the Skilljar website, and you can download that no problem.
Yep, and the key to the project plan is just the goal. Maintaining alignment between the CSM and the customer and making sure everyone's on the same page throughout the process so that you can get to the next phase.
Which is?
Soft launch or beta launch. So this is when you have achieved your MVP and you're ready to start getting feedback from beta users. So the beta users could be internal employees, it could be a handful of customers who are really great with giving feedback. I know when we usually launch something on Skilljar Academy, which is our on-demand training platform, we have a couple of customers that we always reach out to who always give really great constructive feedback. So getting buy-in or feedback from different kind of groups of users is always a really, really great option. And then from there, within that soft launch phase, you also want to make adjustments based on that feedback. So any final adjustments based on the feedback provided by your beta users prior to launch, this is when you want to make it. And then the last phase of onboarding is launch. So this is when training is now open to your intended audience and you're starting to measure success on an ongoing basis. So you've launched to your users, you're measuring success and constantly circling back to those initial goals that were established during the kickoff process. So is what you've launched, are you working towards those goals? Do adjustments need to be made based on the metrics that you're seeing based on what you have launched? So one key thing with soft launch and launch is constantly adjusting based on what you're seeing. So looking at the data and really understanding it and making adjustments to really ensure that the actions that you're taking are aligned with what you're working towards and what you're seeing.
Yeah. We also have the sample onboarding timeline.
Yep, so this timeline, this is kind of a general timeline of everything that needs to be completed throughout onboarding. We tend to share this with customers during the sales and kickoff phase, or the handoff and kickoff phase, just because it helps to kind of map out what onboarding looks like. I think having something that you can reference and see what is this going to look like, when do I need to complete each task, helps to set a really good expectation. So everyone kind of understands what are the next however long going to look like. So everyone's has a clear kind of understanding of what onboarding looks like.
Yeah, and if it wasn't clear, alignment is really the key here. It's just that project plan and sharing this timeline, that just allows you to align with a customer, and it gives them the opportunity to say, this is great, this works for us, these are the people who are going to be involved, or we actually foresee that there's going to be some issues with this phase, and we know in advance that we need to do X, Y, Z in order to make sure that we've secured the right resources or the right individuals are involved. So alignment is really the key here. And this is something like this timeline was so easy to make, just so everybody knows. If you want to make something like this, you can actually just go into Canva. You don't need any design resources. You just go into Canva if you're not familiar. It's kind of like a program that helps you design images, kind of if you have no design background.
Yeah.
And so it makes it really simple. It looks like the questions are coming in. We'll get to those later. Keep them coming. And Mathilde, if there's anything that you want to jump in and let us know, if there's any questions that you want to let us know about in the meantime, you can also feel free to jump in as well.
Sure, sounds good.
Yeah. So that brings us to our next section, which is really engaging your audience. And there were tons of questions in advance. So we reached out to a lot of registrants before the webinar, and we asked you if you had any questions. And a lot of questions were about engaging our audience, and we'll include some of those questions in this section today. So when you're thinking about engaging your audience, the first thing I like to think about is what mediums are you using? And there's no denying that video is just an increasingly popular form of content for learning. People are getting used to learning through video. In fact, online video will account for 80%, maybe even more than 80% of all consumer internet traffic by 2020, according to Cisco. So it's something that you should probably consider when you're building out your program.
Absolutely. And not only is it widely available, but people tend to prefer it. So 59% of executives agree that if both text and video are available on the same topic, they're more likely to choose video. I know for myself personally, I definitely prefer video, especially because I'm in a busy office with a lot going on around me, having to kind of put my focus on reading something and not getting distracted. It's much easier to just watch a quick video and stay fully engaged, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, if you're afraid of getting started with video, maybe you're under the impression that it's going to take a really long time. It's actually really easy to get started. You can try a lightweight program like Camtasia or ScreenFlow. They're also really inexpensive programs as well. You can even use iMovie if you're a Mac user, or I think there's a Windows version, Movie Maker. It's really simple to get started, and I don't think you should worry about the quality as you're getting started. I think the availability is really something to think about. And I would kind of favor having videos available at the very start over having perfect videos available.
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and actually we just launched something on the blog today, I think, about creating software tutorials. Is that, yeah, I'm pretty sure. So you can check out our blog as well, and there's a quick guide for how to get started making software tutorials. Another thing to think about is to keep content short. So according to Vidyard, 56% of all videos published are less than 2 minutes long. And that's no surprise to me, because even on YouTube, if I'm on YouTube, I'm gonna, if it's a 6-minute video, I'm really gonna think twice before I invest that kind of time. So the shorter you can keep it, the better. And there's lots of good reasons to do that. For starters, videos under 90 seconds see an average retention rate of 53% versus 10% for videos that are 30 minutes or up. So if you're one of those people who just wants to kind of take a webinar and put it online, that might not be the best strategy. You might consider keeping content short. In case you're still wondering if it's worth it, we actually recently did a benchmark study looking at all the information that's housed in Skilljar, and we found that courses that were less than 15 minutes in length had over a 90% completion rate. So that means that people were just more interested in sticking around for short courses. It's less of an intimidating experience, and it also helps customers get exactly what they need when you're using short videos. So they can search for a specific video. I know that our search feature is really popular, so people can just get to a specific lesson and see just the content that's relevant to what they need. And as I mentioned, we did receive a lot of questions from folks prior to the webinar, and many of them were about engaging customers. So Annie asked, how can you create excitement or motivation from the get-go? And I think, Sarah, you probably have some great insight into that.
Yes, this is a great question. So one of my recommendations is to be excited in your communication. So when you're communicating with your new customer, be excited with them. Welcome them to the team at the handoff process. Focus on the goals, celebrate milestones. One of the things that we do here at Skilljar is we have a cute little launch, congratulations on your launch card that has a picture of the team, and we're all kind of raising our hands celebrating, that we send to customers when they launch. So really kind of celebrating those milestones and being a part of this process with customers and encouraging them and being excited in the communication that you have with customers, I think helps to kind of keep that excitement throughout the entire process.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really good point. Another question we got, Lori asked, can you tell me about best practices to keep stakeholders engaged when they delay or constantly reschedule? We try to include the executive sponsor in these scenarios, but I'm interested in hearing about any other unique approaches.
Yes, this is a great question too. So engaging with the executive sponsor is a great start. That's where we start as well. If we're noticing that we're kind of losing touch with our contacts, reaching out to the executive sponsor is a great way to go. But also really focusing on like the goals to keep things moving forward and establishing a partnership with whoever your main champions are from the very start, and really understanding what best works for the customer while ensuring that you're still getting what you need to move the project forward is key. So I've noticed that customers tend to go dark when we don't understand what their needs are. So really from the get-go, understanding what they need, what works best for them as far as like communication and staying engaged, utilizing the resources like the project plan and the timeline are all really helpful in getting those stakeholders engaged and keeping them engaged in a way that really works for them.
Yeah, and I think I remember you telling me how much implementing that project plan template really impacted this problem, specifically because I think it kind of it makes it a partnership. It's almost like some lightweight project management that you're providing for them.
Exactly, and it's easy for my team because it's not a huge lift on our side. It's not like we are full-time project managers, but one thing that we do is we start every call that we have with a customer that's in onboarding with a review of the project plan. So we just pull up the project plan, go through each line item and just ask what the updates are. And you can just focus on like what are the key items that are coming up or whatnot. But it's really a great way, again, to maintain that visibility and keep things on track in a way that, like Linda said, creates that partnership. So it's not just one-sided where a CSM is trying to kind of hound a customer for information or communication for that matter.
Yeah, definitely. And the last question we'll address before we're moving on to the next section is, how frequently should you be reaching out to customers during the onboarding process? That question's from Jacqueline.
Awesome. So I say that this really depends on the customer. So kind of back to the flavors that you mentioned earlier, Linda, but obviously high touch customers you're going to reach out to more frequently, lower touch you're not going to reach out to as much. Also, ask the customer what's their preference for ongoing kind of communication. You'll find very quickly, if a customer prefers to speak very frequently or not too frequently. And I think kind of following the customer's lead is important, but from my perspective, check-ins and on a bi-weekly basis are critical. So a lot can happen in 2 weeks. Usually we start off with bi-weekly syncs with a customer, and it could be just a quick check-in call. Hey, what are the updates? How are these items going on the project plan? It doesn't have to take that long, but I think it's super important to check in on a bi-weekly basis. But again, seeing what works best for the customer. Do they prefer to have like a check-in via email every 2 weeks, and the other 2 weeks, then they have a call, or what works best for them, and kind of establishing that from the very start, I think helps with this a lot.
Definitely. I think that it's always a good idea to ask what works best for you. And I think so often we don't. We just have this kind of approach where we have our way of doing things and that's the only way, but then we run into these problems and we don't know what to do. So I think that kind of aligning early is really the key here.
Yep. Definitely agree.
So that brings us to a poll question, and the poll is really about measurement. So the next part, we talked about this webinar is the art and science. We've done a little bit of art, a little bit of science, and now we're going to go pretty hardcore into the science part of onboarding. And our poll question is, especially if you are using an on-demand kind of training platform, how are you currently measuring engagement on that training or in that onboarding? Maybe you're measuring registrations and completions. Maybe you're asking the audience, for example, how much did you enjoy this process? Did you like the training? Audience reaction. Maybe you have another way of measuring your onboarding success, or maybe you don't have any metrics in place yet, and we'd like to know that as well. So take a moment and vote on this quick poll. Thanks, Mathilde, for launching that for us.
No problem. Lots of responses coming through still, so we're gonna give everyone a few seconds to send us their answers.
Perfect. And these, by the way, registrations and completions and audience reaction, while you guys are filling out this poll, both of these are what we call training engagement metrics. So they're really the ones that tend to be focused on how people are engaging with your onboarding process. The things we're going to talk about in addition as we continue this discussion are how is onboarding really impacting your bottom line as well, which it would be our dream if everybody was seeing how training and onboarding was really impacting your customer and their life cycle in terms of revenue and expansions and all sorts of different metrics. So great. Matilda, do you want to show those results?
I'm gonna end the poll and share the results with everyone.
Great. So it looks like about 30% are looking at registrations and completions. We have a handful doing audience reaction. Some people are doing something else completely. Matilda, I don't know, I see some chats coming in. Maybe some folks are telling us what they're doing. If they are, please feel free to chime in and let us know.
Yeah, for sure. We do have some insights here. Someone is saying we use registrations for webinars and Google Analytics for the self-guided content. So a little bit of a mix. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Thanks for letting us know. And if anybody else wants to chime in, we'd be happy to hear more. It does look like there's a fair amount of people who don't have any metrics in place yet. And well, it's a good thing that's what we're discussing now.
Yeah.
So when you're driving onboarding success, it's really important to start from a place of goals. And we are big fans. We're a very data-driven company. We're big fans of developing SMART goals. And if you aren't familiar with the term SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And it's important to start with SMART goals because then you can really see how you're progressing over time. And the first thing I would say you should do as you're building out your goals is to ask yourself where your program stands today and where you want it to be. So for example, maybe today you're training 100 customers every month and you're looking to expand the reach of your program by a certain date. That would be a great goal. So maybe that's a percentage-based increase, for example. Or maybe you're looking at completion rates today and you want to bump that up and create more compelling content that's going to inspire your customers to stick with it from start to finish. So you could have a goal around completion rates. But the first thing you have to do in order to set a SMART goal is to understand exactly where you are today. And the next thing you want to make sure you're doing is align with relevant stakeholders. It would be a huge mistake and a big myth if you set all these goals, you're working towards them, and you are not aligned with leadership and they don't know what you're working towards and you haven't shared that with them. So you definitely want to, before you even set your goals, set clear expectations for your program by meeting with leadership and finding out what they want you to achieve. So when we talk about baseline metrics, and I mentioned them briefly, some of the areas that you can take a look at are product adoption metrics. So if you have any usage data, there are some product tools out there that can help you understand exactly how much people are accessing things. I know I use Intercom quite a bit to see just kind of how often people are accessing the application. You can also get baseline data on customer churn and renewals to see how people who are being trained are sticking around longer, let's say, than those who don't. And if you have some sort of training platform, you can do registrations and completions as well. Or even if you're doing live training or a webinar program, you can look at registrations and who's attended or watched a webinar on demand. So these are some good baselines that you can get started with. And some of these are those training metrics that are really looking at what you're doing and how people are attending. And others, like product adoption and customer renewals, for example, are what I'd like to call lagging indicators, the things that hopefully your training program is really moving the needle on. Another idea is to compare time spent in app and time spent in training. So do people who take more training spend more time in your application? And you can collaborate with your product team to capture this customer behavior data. And it's super impactful because if you can connect these dots, then you're definitely going to get some great buy-in for your training program as you see kind of more educated customers really adopting your product in a better way. Speaking to customer churn and renewals a little bit, a sample calculation or kind of a goal that you can take a look at is of X customers who renewed or expanded, what percentage took training? So it's just an interesting thing to know. And the reason it's interesting is because if you're investing quite a bit in your training program and this isn't changing anything, you might want to take a look at the tactics that you're using and how you're reaching customers and what content you're training on. Another way that you could look at that, by the way, is of a certain percent of why customers who churned, what percentage took training. So do customers that churn not take training or take it? So take a look at this. I think it's really impactful and can really help you move the needle.
Absolutely. So registrations and completions. So this data provides helpful insight into which topics are of interest. So specifically, which topics that you're covering are users most interested. This will help to kind of guide what you should be creating in the future and investing your time in. Next, whether your marketing is effective. So are the marketing efforts that you're investing your time in, are they effective? Are they showing the results that you expect? And if not, what changes need to be made based on what you're seeing?
And this is marketing your training, right?
Yep, yeah. Exactly. Then where you're losing users. So where are users dropping off? Is it that your content is too long? Is it there's some kind of misunderstanding or something's a little bit confusing? But where is it that you're losing users? And dig into why is it that you're losing users? And then lastly, course length optimization. So we talked about students being more engaged, completing watching videos that are much shorter. This falls right into that. So making sure that your course length is appropriate for your users and not too long where they're gonna, not end up, that'll significantly impact your overall completion.
Definitely. And if you're looking for a benchmark, by the way, we have a general one for you, even though we do think you should benchmark on your own data as well. We've seen a 5% increase across our platform in completion rate. We're sitting pretty at about 48% of all courses on Skilljar are completed after registration. So if you're looking for a good benchmark, 48% might be a great place to start if you have no other data available.
Mm-hmm. All right, so key takeaways here. First, prioritize popular content first. Second, align customer success and sales to really streamline your onboarding process. State of the state. Where are you now? How are you measuring this?
Yeah, well, and with that, it is time for some questions and answers. So we are happy to answer any questions you might have. Send them over. I know that there are a lot. If we don't get to them today, you can feel free to reach out to us at Skilljar on Twitter. You can reach out to me, particularly on LinkedIn, if you'd like, and I'd be happy to continue the conversation. But Mathilde, I'll turn it over to you for some questions that you have for us.
Awesome. First of all, thank you so much for sharing all of that good stuff with us. It was awesome. Also, thanks to everyone who's been so active in the chat, really loving all of the exchange of knowledge going on here. We have a lot of people asking questions to other attendees and people sharing how they're doing customer success themselves. So really loving that. Would definitely encourage people to stay active in the chat, but there is also a dedicated Q&A tool that we're going to be using to answer all of those questions with Linda. So we already have a few questions lined up, so why don't we get started? And I really encourage everyone to send us more questions and we'll try as much as possible to answer all of them live. So a question from Katie here is, we have an LMS with courses and videos to onboard our customers, but we're having difficulties to raise awareness around our LMS. So what proposals do you have for raising awareness and general marketing tips to get people to learn about your learning management system?
Yeah, great question. We actually talk about this with customers all the time, and we have an ebook about this exact topic. If you're interested in downloading it, it might give you some tips. I would definitely start by meeting with your marketing team and seeing what resources are available to you. So a lot of training access is just related to whether or not you've put some marketing muscle behind it. And once you determine what you have access to, maybe you'll be able to do some drip campaigns around it. It's possible that you can activate your CSMs and your sales team as well. I know Sarah's done that a bunch.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that's how we drive our customers to Skilljar Academy, is really utilizing your support teams, your customer success teams, really anyone who is touching the customer, making sure that they're really on board and pushing your LMS and your training to your customers. I think a lot of times customers aren't engaged in training because they might not necessarily know about it. So one of the things that we do on our team is anytime a customer emails us with a question, if we have a support article or a course, a specific lesson within a course that was created for that question, we'll answer their question, but we'll always include a link to that specific content. So it kind of passively sets that expectation with customers that there is another resource that they can get on demand. They don't have to wait for us to respond. So utilizing marketing is huge, but there's a lot that you can do within your teams to really drive usage that way as well.
Yeah, and one thing we talk about a lot as well is how knowledge-based articles are often kind of feature-based. I think of them as a snack to the LMS, which kind of is a full course meal, right? So sorry, I'm back to the eating metaphors. But really, if you link to courses within your knowledge base, I think that can also be really impactful. So somebody gets like a little bit of knowledge from the knowledge base, and then they want to actually learn about this entire topic, they can go and link easily to the course within your LMS. And that can really help also drive people.
That's a great point.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer. We have one quick question in the chat, which I just want to mention very quickly, is someone is asking what other tools can be used to automate onboarding process. Just gonna low-key mention that Amity does that, so put it out there. But here's another question for you. Do you have any thoughts on how you can scale the kickoff process without adding more headcount?
How can you scale the kickoff process without adding more headcount? I think process is really helpful in that sense.
Yeah, I was going to say tools, like the use of helpful tools, like the project plan. So one thing, I know I'm pushing the project plan heavily, but I'm a firm believer that it's really an effective tool. It's the project plan, we frame it as the customer owns this. So this is something that they own. Say that they're a customer that doesn't necessarily want to have regular calls. They don't have a lot of time to like set aside meetings just to give us updates on what's going on with them. Use tools, put processes in place so that they can do that easily, and it's not going to take up a ton of your time. So I think process is key, and kind of the tools that are needed to support your customers. I know that's what we were doing when we had a pretty small team of CSMs here at Skilljar.
Yeah, and also like in Skilljar, for example, that project plan is part of, we have an introductory lesson. So if we didn't have the time or the bandwidth to have a kickoff call with every customer, we have that process outlined for them on demand, and it's self-paced. So you don't have to feel obligated to talk to every customer on the phone if you don't have the team for that, or if it's not necessary for your product. Maybe you're more of that self-serve or mid complexity onboarding. So there's a few different ways I think you can do that.
Awesome, thanks. One question from Adam here is, do you hold a handoff meeting with the sales team and CS team for every single account? How long is that meeting, and what should be the main takeaways from that meeting?
Yeah, great question. So we try to do it for every customer. We don't always have the bandwidth to do it for every customer. So ideally, the goal is for every customer, and usually it's a quick meeting, and it really depends on the customer. So smaller, less complex customers, it's usually just like a quick 10-minute sync. It doesn't have to be a super formal meeting, but it's really just reviewing the documentation that's been provided, understanding the customer's use cases, goals, anything specific that would be helpful for the CSM to have as they start to kick off the process with the customer. And it could be like, you know, larger business drivers, but it could be communication preference or who's going to be involved in the process. So it doesn't have to be super in-depth, although for like larger enterprise customers, we usually set up a much more formal, like at least 30-minute internal sync just to really kind of dig into strategy. Usually our solutions team has been involved. So just kind of a time to align. But for the most part, it doesn't have to be, you know, a big time commitment, just a quick sync to make sure that the CSM is, you know, fully prepped with all the information they need to ensure a smooth transition for the customer.
Nice. Yeah, and Matilda, I actually saw a question on here that I'd love to talk through a little bit, if that's okay with you.
For sure.
It's from Mindy. It was about a recent study by Burson found video learning to be less effective than instructor-led or VILT. Or interactive e-learning as well. And while we know video is popular, the effectiveness is a concern. And have we seen a difference in completion or adoption rates for just watching video courses? So I can say that video courses did tend to have higher completion rates. While I don't know, and I think it depends on the quality of that video and kind of what you're addressing, how it affects adoption. I think that if in life, we had the bandwidth to train every single person face-to-face or through VILT, a custom session, let's say, that would be great. But unfortunately, it's really expensive for a lot of customers, and that's out of scope for a lot of them. And it's also really expensive for the company hosting those trainings. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of what we're discussing is kind of a complementary program that you can run in addition to VILT or ILT, instructor-led training, for those of you who aren't familiar with that acronym. I think it's a complement when you have the resources to run a training program that incorporates those components. But when you don't, I think video is an excellent replacement. And we are seeing excellent completion rates on video, far actually higher than a lot of, let's say, SCORM content or interactive e-learning. And I think the jury's still out on how effective it is, but it's definitely a great place to start. And it's a great place to scale your onboarding when resources are tight.
Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that we found as well for our onboarding so normally customers come to customer success manager. During that handoff process, we tell them about Skilljar Academy. So if they're ready to get started, they want to kind of dig into that on-demand training, they can. And we found that although we still have like a formal onboarding process with like a one-on-one CSM meeting, having that supplemental on-demand training to kind of get things started has really elevated the conversations that our customer success managers have with customers. So I definitely agree that, you can use it solely if you have a small team and you really need to scale, or you can use it to really enhance the one-on-one training or group training that you might already be providing.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks for the question.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that. I'm going to go ahead and pick out a few more questions, but before doing that, we have a few people asking us about the deck and the recording and whether or not they will be sent out. So I just want to make sure I'm telling everyone now, we are recording this and we will be sending the deck as well this week. So keep an eye on your inbox. And then we are getting a lot of questions around how to organize and structure your team. So Heidi here is asking, do you have CSMs implement the onboarding process, or do you have a separate onboarding specialist? Which one do you suggest? Hunter here is asking what the benefits of having a dedicated onboarding team is as opposed to having the CSMs doing it. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a great question, and actually something that we're dealing with right now here at Skilljar. So I started, just to give you a little bit of backstory, I started here at Skilljar a little over a year ago as our second customer success manager. I was onboarding all new customers for about the following 8 months. And then we hired additional CSMs. We have since realized that having a dedicated customer success manager from handoff all the way, as long as through the life of the customer is not a scalable process. So we're currently working on building out kind of what that looks like going forward. And we're segmenting it based on packages. So based on like the customer success package that the customer purchases during the sales process determines the level of support that they get. So larger enterprise customers will get a fully dedicated customer success manager, whereas smaller like SMB customers would get a dedicated onboarding specialist who's their main point of contact through launch. Then once they launch, our support team would basically help to support them through that. So I think it's wonderful to have a dedicated customer success manager through the life of for all of your customers, but it's not necessarily scalable. So I think if you are growing and needing to scale onboarding, having an onboarding specialist is a great way to do it, because customers are still getting that one-on-one support, but it's not indefinite where the onboarding specialist is never feeling relief and you have to continue to grow your team. So that's kind of where we are now. And we're currently, like I said, working on building this out at Skilljar. So I think there's a lot of validity in breaking out the two roles, just to really scale your program.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think one thing that Sarah mentioned in the beginning was about the packages. And I think it's something to think about depending on how much service your customers require or need, or how much is advantageous for you as a business as well. Mm-hmm. It is just that for some businesses, experimentation to see kind of, well, what do customers want? Where do they want to land? Mm-hmm. But even when you don't have, let's say, a dedicated CSM, does somebody want to purchase that? And how does that change the relationship? And looking into that, and especially if you're a small company, experimentation with things like this can also be really, you can learn a lot about your customers, what they need, and what you need to make them successful. Because that's really, at the end of the day, that's what we care about the most, is that every single one of the customers that walk through our doors, or metaphorically walk through our doors, are super successful.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing those insights. One more question here from Jacqueline is, how do you properly close out clients from the onboarding phase, or do you even formally do so?
Yeah, so onboarding is officially closed from our perspective once the customer moves to soft launch, or really launch. So yeah, once the customer has launched to their external users, that's when the onboarding phase is officially closed out. But we can move back to onboarding at a future time. So as the customer identifies additional initiatives and goals that are associated with those initiatives, we might move back into onboarding to achieve those goals. So this would include like a new project plan and so on. But we close out that onboarding phase once the customer launches.
Yeah, and that actually speaks to the importance of creating those milestones for your customer success business, generally speaking. So taking a look at your product, what they need to be successful, and what those key milestones are, which will just help you put in a process around this and really feel good that somebody's set up for success. The other point I wanted to add is that onboarding, while there is a time that you can close out a client from onboarding, don't forget that account onboarding is very different than user onboarding. So at any moment, a user can jump ship, they leave, they find a different job, or they go elsewhere. And then you have to kind of have a process for re-engaging an onboarding process.
Yep.
And identifying when those contacts have left.
Awesome, great point. So it's 1:58. Let's try and answer one more question. Squeeze it in before the end if we can.
Ooh, yeah.
So last question from Monica is, my question is about unresponsive customers. What are some tips and tricks for engaging or re-engaging customers?
Yeah, this is a good one, and one thing that we do run into here. So one thing that you can do that I found is highly effective is sometimes you'll complete the handoff process, the customer's engaged, and then they kind of go quiet. And one thing that's been highly effective for us is we will have whoever the customer was working with initially, usually their account executive or their solutions architect, we'll have them reach out. Usually hearing from another member on the team, someone that they're also familiar with, oftentimes sparks a response. Also, like escalating, sometimes I'll help to reach out to customers for my team members if they're not getting a response, and just requesting a quick call to kind of see what's going on and how we can help them. But I think re-engaging with having others on your team reach out to that customer in potentially a slightly different approach as far as like the messaging that they send to that customer based on their previous communication is a great way to get them re-engaged. It's not always 100% successful, but I have seen that it's most of the time we get a pretty quick response just because they see a familiar name and just send like a quick email giving a status update, and that usually re-engages them.
Awesome. Thanks for those awesome tips. So it's almost 2, so I'd really like to thank everyone who's been attending today and has been so incredibly engaged in the chat, sending us awesome questions in the Q&A. I know we didn't get to answer all of them, unfortunately, but I think Linda was saying that you could maybe connect with her on LinkedIn. Is that correct, Linda?
Yeah, connect with us on LinkedIn. Tweet at us if you'd like at Skilljar. I'll see those too. We'd love to hear from you. And I just want to thank you, Matilda and Amity, for hosting us today. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm really, really glad you joined us today. And thank you so much for taking the time to put together all of this great content. So yeah, thank you, Skilljar, and thank you, Linda and Sarah. And thanks again to everyone who joined us today. I hope everyone has an awesome day, and we'll see you next year.
Have a good one. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.